Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Ready for another deep dive today?
Always.
All right, well, today we're going to be looking at the Luckin Coffee accounting fraud scandal
Ooh,
back in 2020.
I remember when that happened.
Yeah, you might be thinking, oh, just another corporate scandal. How exciting.
Right.
But trust me, this one is wild.
It is a wild one.
Yeah, twists and turns you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of dig into this and look at the ins and outs.
Absolutely. And to do that, we're going to be using an article on the Shipping and Commodity Academy website. It's titled Luckin Coffee Accounting Fraud 2020. Full story. Everything you need to know.
Okay, yeah, I think that that's going to be really helpful to kind of get all the information in one place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this case is really interesting because it goes beyond, just like your typical financial scandal, and it really offers like a glimpse into international business and investor trust, and also the rapid growth of the Chinese market. So
Oh, for sure.
there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to set the scene, it's like 2017. Luckin Coffee explodes onto the scene in China, aiming straight for Starbucks' crown.
They came out of nowhere, and
Yeah.
they were like, we are here to compete.
Yes.
And their strategy was very different, too. I mean, they were very tech-savvy, convenience-focused, understanding that China's younger consumers, they were glued to their smartphones, so
Right.
everything was through the app, ordering, payment, loyalty programs.
That's so smart.
Yeah.
So it worked.
You did.
Like a charm. In just a couple of years, they opened thousands of locations.
It was insane. Their growth was incredible.
Yeah, and by 2019, they were listed on the Nasdaq, which that's the American Stock Exchange, if you didn't know.
Right.
And they even had this, like, wildly successful IPO. IPO stands for Initial Public Offering, by the way.
Oh, right.
It's basically when a company first sells shares of itself to the public.
Like their coming out party
Yeah.
for investors. It was like a textbook example of a company riding this massive wave of hype. And investor enthusiasm, I mean, everything seemed to be pointing towards success,
Yeah. But here comes the twist. Just a year later, bam.
Yeah.
The news drops that Luckin Coffee has been faking their sales figures.
Oh, no.
And not just by a little bit.
Oh, really?
Like, we're talking a whopping $310 million in inflated revenue.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not just like a rounding error. That's a full-blown scheme to deceive investors.
Yeah.
And it worked for a while. It worked for a while
But
until
someone decided to speak up, right?
Right.
Enter the whistleblower.
The infamous whistleblower.
Yeah. In January 2020, an anonymous tip alleging financial misconduct just landed on someone's desk. That's what triggered the whole investigation.
Wow.
Think about the guts that took.
Seriously,
Yeah.
whistleblowers are so important for corporate accountability. But, I mean, they face huge personal and professional risks
Oh, yeah.
for doing the right thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So the investigation starts digging. What do they find?
Well, they find this, like, complex web of fabricated transactions, cooked books. They created fake documents to back up their inflated sales number. It was like it was like an operation.
Oh, wow.
And the craziest thing is, the deception went all the way to the top, implicating the CEO and other high-level executives.
So it wasn't just like a couple of rogue employees trying to, like, make a quick buck. This was orchestrated from the very top.
Yeah, it was very calculated.
Wow. So what happened next?
Well, once the news broke, the fallout was pretty swift and severe. Luckin Coffee's stock price, it tanked.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Investors were understandably furious. They filed a bunch of lawsuits.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
And regulators on both sides of the Pacific, in the U.S. and China, I bet they weren't too happy either.
Oh, they were not happy. They came down hard.
Yeah.
Regulators imposed hefty fines on the company for, just blatant disregard of financial reporting rules and regulations.
Right. So the scandal's out in the open. The company's reputation is in tatters. What did Luckin Coffee do to try and pick up the pieces?
Well, they went into full damage control mode. They shook up their management team, trying to distance themselves from the previous leadership.
Right.
They made some operational changes. And eventually in 2021, they filed for bankruptcy and went through a restructuring process.
So they basically hit the reset button. But I imagine regaining trust after something like this was a pretty monumental task.
Oh, absolutely. The damage to their brand was, like, profound. And, it really underscored the importance of transparency and ethical behavior in the business world.
Because this wasn't just about Luckin Coffee, was it? This scandal had much wider implications.
It really did. This whole episode shook investor confidence, particularly in Chinese companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges. People started questioning the reliability of financial reporting coming out of China.
Yeah. And China itself had to take notice, right?
Right.
I mean, they want their companies to be seen as trustworthy on the global stage.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
what did they do?
So the Chinese government, they responded by implementing new audit and compliance regulations, aiming to prevent similar scandals from happening again. They were basically forced to step up their game. In terms of financial transparency and accountability on a global scale.
So this whole situation, like, really forced China's hand in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right?
Mm.
How the actions of one company can have such far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
But what about the human element in all of this? It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the regulations, but think about the people involved, the employees, the investors. This wasn't just an abstract financial scandal.
Right. It had real-world consequences.
It did. Yeah, it really did. Like, it raises some interesting questions about, like, personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Like, what would you do if you discovered something like this was happening at your own company?
Yeah.
Would you have the courage to be a whistleblower?
Oh.
Knowing the risks involved.
That's a tough one.
It is.
I think it's easy to say you do the right thing.
Right.
But when you're in that situation, facing potential retaliation.
Oh, for sure.
It's a different story.
Yeah.
And, this case really highlights the immense pressure that exists within companies, especially, I think, in rapidly growing markets like China, to deliver constant impressive results. Like, that pressure can create a culture where cutting corners or even, like, engaging in outright fraud starts to feel like the only option.
It's almost like a systemic issue, where the pursuit of growth, like at any cost, can lead to these kinds of ethical lapses.
Exactly. And I think in the age of social media and instant information, the temptation to present like a picture-perfect image, even if it's completely fabricated, can be so strong.
Yeah.
Think about it. We're constantly seeing stories about overnight success, of companies disrupting industries and achieving astronomical valuations.
It creates this expectation that if your company isn't experiencing that kind of, like, meteoric rise, you're somehow failing.
Right. And that pressure, I think, can lead to bad decisions, like the ones that were made by the leaders at Luckin Coffee. They chose to prioritize short-term gains and personal enrichment over the long-term well-being of the company and its stakeholders.
So it's like greed trumping integrity.
Yeah, classic case.
Yeah, and ultimately it backfired spectacularly.
Oh, yeah.
Not just for the individuals involved,
right,
but for the company as a whole.
Yeah.
And for the reputation of Chinese businesses.
Yeah.
On the global stage.
Absolutely, yeah. The Luckin Coffee scandal, I think, serves as a cautionary tale, right? Reminding us that true success is built on a foundation of ethics, not just on flashy numbers or a soaring stock price.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What can we learn from this whole mess? How can we prevent something like this from happening again?
Well, I think for starters, it reinforces the importance of due diligence, right? Whether you're an investor, considering putting your money into a company, or a consumer deciding which products to buy. Don't just blindly trust the marketing hype. Do your research, ask questions, be skeptical of claims that seem too good to be true.
It's like that old saying, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this principle applies not just to financial matters,
Oh, for sure.
but to all aspects of life. Don't just passively absorb information. Actively question it, analyze it, seek out multiple perspectives. We live in an age of information overload, but it's so important to be critical thinkers.
So we need to be more discerning about the information we consume and the companies we support. What about the role of regulation? Can't governments do more to prevent corporate fraud?
Oh, absolutely. And, in the wake of the Luckin Coffee scandal, we've seen some positive steps in that direction. China's new audit and compliance regulations, I think, are a good example of how governments can respond to these kinds of events by, strengthening oversight, promoting greater transparency.
But regulations alone aren't enough.
No, definitely not. I think it's also crucial to foster a culture of ethical leadership within companies themselves. Leaders need to set the tone from the top, demonstrating a commitment to integrity, transparency, accountability. And they need to create an environment where employees feel comfortable speaking up if they see something wrong.
Which brings us back to the role of whistleblowers. These individuals are often the first line of defense. against corporate misconduct.
That's right. And their actions should be encouraged and protected, not punished or ignored.
So it's a multifaceted issue, requiring action from governments, companies, and individuals. We all have a role to play in this.
We do.
Yeah, ensuring that businesses operate ethically and responsibly.
Exactly. And cases like the Luckin Coffee scandal, I think they serve as powerful reminders of what can happen when those principles are ignored.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something that I found really interesting. In this article from the Shipping and Commodity Academy,
Yeah, what is it?
well, they delve into the specifics of how Luckin Coffee actually pulled off this fraud.
Right.
It wasn't just a matter of, like, fudging some numbers.
Right.
They created this elaborate scheme. It involved fake transactions, shell companies, even fabricated customer data. It
Wow.
was like something out of a spy thriller.
Seriously, it's mind-blowing how far they went to deceive investors and inflate their valuation, And for a while, they fooled everyone.
It really makes you wonder how many other companies out there
Yeah.
might be getting away with similar schemes.
Right.
It's a sobering thought.
It is, and I think it underscores the importance of constantly questioning, scrutinizing, demanding more transparency from the businesses that we interact with.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Luckin Coffee scandal, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listener to walk away with today?
I think the biggest lesson here is that while growth and innovation are important, they should never come at the expense of ethics and integrity.
Right.
Luckin Coffee's story, I think, is a cautionary tale of what can happen when those principles are sacrificed in the pursuit of short-term gains.
It's a reminder that true success is built on a foundation of trust, transparency, and accountability.
Exactly.
And those values matter, not just in the business world, but in all aspects of life.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure
It has, yeah.
dissecting this case with you.
Now, before we go, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to ponder. So, what if you were in a position to invest in a company like Luckin Coffee before the scandal broke? What signs could have tipped you off that maybe something wasn't quite right?
This is a really good question. I think, looking back, there were definitely some red flags that maybe should have raised some eyebrows. For example, their growth was almost too fast. They were opening stores at an unprecedented rate. And I remember at the time, some analysts were skeptical that they could sustain that pace without, compromising quality or profitability.
So that breakneck speed that initially seemed so impressive could have actually been like a warning sign.
Exactly, yeah. I think it's important to remember that sustainable growth usually takes time, and careful planning. When a company expands too quickly, it can be a sign that they're, cutting corners or prioritizing growth above all else.
And in Luckin Coffee's case, it turned out that their aggressive expansion was fueled by, well, fabricated sales figures.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we can't always believe what we see on the surface, right?
Right.
We need to dig deeper, ask tough questions, and be willing to challenge the narrative, even when it's a compelling one.
Absolutely. And, this applies not just to investing, but to all aspects of life. We're constantly bombarded with information, and it's easy to get caught up in the hype or to accept things at face value. But I think developing critical thinking skills is more crucial now than ever.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Luckin Coffee saga, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the biggest lesson here is that while growth and innovation are important, they should never come at the expense of ethics and integrity. Luckin Coffee's story is a cautionary tale of what can happen when those principles are sacrificed in the pursuit of short-term gains.
Yeah. It's a reminder that true success is built on a foundation of trust, transparency, and accountability. And those values matter, not just in the business world, but in all aspects of life.
Well said. Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, a big thank you to you for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a fascinating conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. It's been great.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And be sure to check out that full article from the Shipping and Commodity Academy for even more detail on this fascinating case. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.